Hi, Miss Blake.
Huh? What's the matter with her?
I don't know. She's an awful friend.
It is the end of the school day, but for Marjorie Blake, the end of the day brings only an extension of her school problems and tensions. What a horrible day this has been. She couldn't have stood it for another minute. There was that episode in the first period with Bob Allen. To her, Bob was a problem boy. He was uncooperative and resented school. As usual, he refused to do the assigned work. She knew that he was having considerable trouble at home in his relations with his parents. Maybe she should have taken a more active interest in his problem, but she was only human and had entirely too many others to think about.
Bob, come up here.
What does she want now?
Let me see that paper.
Today, she was in no mood to act as counselor to a sullen troublemaker. She found him more trying than usual and told him off in no uncertain terms. It was clear to her that the class was becoming hostile, but she'd show them who was boss. And then that fourth period, right in the middle of it, she received a note from the principal. Another report due. What a nuisance. The only thing she could do was interrupt her teaching and give the class something to do. The principal wanted her to stop by on her way to lunch and bring her monthly attendance report, which was due the day before. He added that she apparently overlooked sending it in. All right, if that's the way he wants it, that's the way he'll have it. She'll have to do the report during class time. Her interview with Mr. Mullins, the principal, didn't help any. He reminded her that state aid to the school was dependent on attendance reports and patiently pointed out the importance of accuracy and promptness. But Miss Blake objected. With so many papers to correct every night and with attendance and so many other reports that had to be prepared, how could she possibly find the time for it all? Something about her job is wrong, very wrong. This day has been rough, and yet days like this have been getting more numerous. The thought kept running through her mind, what's happening to me? She recalled when she began teaching scarcely 10 years ago. She had felt so proud and happy when she got her first teaching job. She was diligent and meticulous. She set high standards for her students and worked patiently with them. She really liked her job. She worked hard on the plans for her classes. She assigned lots of reading and written work and scheduled frequent examinations. She was so conscientious that she took her work home. The load of paperwork became steadily heavier. She went out less and less and gave up purely recreational activities. In spite of her continuous efforts over the years, her students did not come up to the standards she had set for them. Today, her students still fall short of her expectations. What is worse, she feels that a wall has arisen between her and her students, and she knows she is not reaching them. She could never remember being so tired. What is really wrong? In contrast, there are thousands of teachers, men and women of various ages, who maintain their interest and enthusiasm. For example, here's Frank Roberts, teacher of science. Frank is 28 years old. He's been teaching for 5 years. He thoroughly enjoys working with young people. Students look on him as a superior teacher, interesting, helpful, and fun to be around. They respect his ability to make scientific concepts clear through interesting explanations and through simple experiments with materials of everyday use which are familiar to them. Actually, Frank has had his problems in adjusting to a career in education. During his undergraduate days, Frank began making long-range plans for a career in teaching. As soon as he obtained his first teaching position, he would start taking graduate courses in school administration and get his master's degree in 2 years. He wanted to become a principal as soon as possible. According to plan, he obtained his first teaching position. He enrolled at once for a heavy load of graduate work. But he found in carrying so much graduate study, he couldn't do the kind of teaching job he wanted to do, especially handling the individual problems of students. As a result of the overload of work which he had undertaken outside of school, Frank began to develop a nervousness and impatience that often showed up in his relationships with students in class. He found himself losing his temper at times. He was smart enough to realize, however, that these tensions might well jeopardize his attaining the higher position he sought. Frank finally faced up to the fact that his plans were too ambitious. He would have to revise his time schedule. He also realized that his plans needed further modification to provide for more adequate personal growth, a chance to have some fun, to make new friendships outside of school. Physical exercise was one answer. He also became interested in the community house of one of the local churches. After attending several meetings, he offered to organize and to instruct a photographic hobby group. From this activity, Frank gained considerable recognition in the community, as well as further skill in working with people. But what is more important, he was getting more fun out of life. Frank has now been teaching for 5 years. He has completed his master's degree and has made a good start in bringing into balance his plans for personal and professional growth. Harriet Taylor is another teacher who, unlike Miss Blake, has made a successful adjustment to teaching. Mrs. Taylor teaches French, which she thinks of as a means of communication between people, rather than a series of mental exercises in a book. Not that Mrs. Taylor neglects the technical elements of the language, quite the contrary. However, she motivates such study by teaching the use of language in functional situations, such as writing letters. By exchanging these letters and checking each other's errors, much of the drudgery of corrective work is taken care of by the students themselves. What would ordinarily be a chore to a teacher becomes an interesting and informative activity for students. Another technique Mrs. Taylor employs is to create simple, lifelike situations which she and the students can dramatize. Here the students are acting out the ordering of a meal in a French restaurant. Mrs. Taylor is well liked by the teaching staff. Her friendliness, her sense of humor, her readiness to relate an anecdote have lightened the free moments when she can get together with her fellow teachers. But it wasn't always that way. A few years ago, in her zeal to do a good job, Mrs. Taylor was excessively dominating the class. She felt all she had to do was get the class over the technical hurdles, and they'd be able to enjoy the language as she did. She forgot at times that she and her students didn't look at the subject in quite the same way. When they didn't respond to these drills, she assigned more work, gave more tests. This meant an additional load for her. Putting in more time, driving herself harder. As time went on, she realized things weren't going well. Perhaps part of the trouble lay in the double load of trying to be a good mother as well as a good teacher. Mrs. Taylor's husband and daughter were quite willing to give more help with the household chores to lessen the load on her. The Taylors frequently held conferences like this to work out solutions to their problems. One night, their conference led to a decision that they could afford to spend their summer vacation in France. Perhaps this was a good way of getting away from the stress and strain of school, a time to relax and to think. At last, the great day arrived. In that exciting summer, Mrs. Taylor saw that language is life. She discovered how much more she got out of the language by being a part of it, how much more meaningful it was. And if for her, why not for her pupils? Relaxed and exuberant, she returned home with a new slant on her work. Today and for a long time to come, her classes will benefit from the change in her approach to teaching. Through careful planning and cooperation by her family, Mrs. Taylor has successfully combined marriage and teaching. Miss Annie Winfield is another teacher who has been able to build a fine philosophy of life and to give her pupils rich and satisfying experiences. Miss Winfield has taught in the elementary school for over 30 years. She is one of the best-loved teachers in the school. She is devoted to her pupils. She gives freely of her time and energy to all in accordance with their needs. She likes to have her pupils participate in planning the class work and in assuming some responsibility for classroom activities. Through careful attention to details and plans, she is able to minimize the confusion and irritation experienced by less successful teachers. Pupils in her class say they learn a lot. They work hard, but don't seem to mind it. Miss Winfield likes to keep up to date on current educational thought and to meet teachers from other parts of the country. She studied last year in summer school, as she has done many times before. Annie Winfield may be near retirement, but she has never permitted herself to grow old in ideas. She never married, but has always been close in the family activities of her married brothers. She now lives with her elderly mother. She has good friends all over town, and in faraway places, too, many of them former pupils. She deals with all people naturally and sincerely. She is seldom alone. Every afternoon when she goes home from school, she has company. Children seek her out because they like to be with her. To them, she is a lovable person, a good sport, someone who can really laugh along with them. 4 teachers. Marjorie Blake failed to recognize the nature of the problems she faced in her growth as a teacher, so she was unable even to begin to solve them. Frank Roberts, with strong ambitions, is successfully modifying his plans in terms of his ultimate objectives. Harriet Taylor, a mother in addition to being a teacher who at first didn't find her career progressing smoothly, finally developed a plan of relating teaching to life, both for her students and for herself. Annie Winfield, whose love for children and enthusiasm for teaching have stimulated her personal and professional growth through the years. 4 teachers, each different in his plans for personal and professional growth. Why is it that teaching can be a source of dullness and frustration for some, and a rich and rewarding experience for others?